The night I signed my divorce papers, I laughed so hard the neighbors probably thought I'd lost my mind. It wasn't the joyful kind of laugh either, it was the kind that splits your chest because if you don't laugh, you'll start screaming. The courthouse hallway smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant, the perfect perfume for the death of a marriage. By the time I stumbled into the parking lot, the February air bit through my coat. I clutched the folder of final documents like a shield, though it felt more like a tombstone. 7 years of shared holidays and whispered promises boiled down to a few sheets of paper. My fingers trembled not from the cold, but from the dizzying emptiness. I didn't cry. Not then. I'd already wept through a year of sleepless nights, of watching the person I once trusted more than anyone slowly become a stranger. I thought I'd feel relief, but all I felt was a cavernous silence, like my life had been a room suddenly stripped of all furniture. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister. "You okay? Want me to come over?" I stared at it until the screen went black. What could I say? That I was fine? That would be a lie. That I wasn't? That felt like handing someone a problem they couldn't solve. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and let the cold night swallow me whole. 2 weeks later I met her. The hospital corridors where I worked as a medical researcher were fluorescent bright and eternally humming with the rhythm of beeping monitors and rushed footsteps. I'd spent years there, half living in labs and conference rooms, my heart buried in clinical trials and data sets. But that morning, when I walked into the cardiology department for a routine briefing, something shifted. She was standing by the window, a white coat draped elegantly over a fitted charcoal dress, dark hair pinned into a loose bun that looked like it might tumble at any second. Dr. Natalie Pierce, the new attending physician, fresh from a prestigious fellowship at Johns Hopkins. Everyone had been talking about her for days. The brilliant young doctor who could charm even the most stubborn patients. When she turned, our eyes met. I swear the air changed temperature. Her eyes were a stormy gray, the kind that held both a challenge and an invitation. For the briefest moment, the world beyond her blurred. The squeak of nurses' shoes, the whir of the vending machine, the sharp scent of antiseptic. "Hi," she said, offering a hand. Her voice was smooth, low, with the kind of confidence that made you want to listen. "You must be Dr. Blake. I've heard your research is practically legendary." Legendary? I almost laughed. At that moment, with my life scattered like confetti in a winter wind, the word felt like a cruel joke. "Legendary might be a stretch," I said, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, warm, grounding. That was the first spark. A simple touch, a simple word. But it burned through the fog I'd been living in. Over the next few weeks, Natalie and I kept crossing paths at late-night rounds, in cramped elevators, in the staff lounge when the coffee had gone stale. She had a way of filling a room without trying, of leaning casually against a counter while discussing complex cases as though she were telling a story. I should have noticed the signs earlier. How I began timing my coffee breaks to match hers. How her laugh, sharp and unexpectedly musical, echoed in my head long after I'd gone home. But denial is a stubborn friend. It wasn't until one evening, when we both stayed late for an emergency case, that the truth started to bloom. The hospital quieted after midnight. Natalie and I sat side by side in the empty break room, the hum of the soda machine the only sound. She leaned back, stretching her neck, a few loose strands of hair falling against her cheek. "Rough day," she sighed. "Sometimes it feels like no matter what we do, it's never enough." Her voice carried a softness I hadn't heard before. I wanted to reach out, to brush the hair from her face, to tell her I understood. Instead I said, "Yeah, medicine is a strange kind of heartbreak." She turned to me, those gray eyes catching the dim light. "You get it," she whispered, almost as if to herself. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was heavy, charged, like the pause before a storm. I felt the world tilt slightly, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt seen. But the heart is rarely simple. My ex-husband, Mark, reappeared like a bad penny. One evening he showed up at my apartment unannounced, his hair damp from rain, his eyes full of a regret I no longer recognized. "Clara," he said, using the name only he ever called me, "can we talk?" I should have shut the door. Instead, old habits betrayed me. "I don't think there's anything left to say," I managed, gripping the doorframe. He looked at me like a man who'd lost his compass. "I made mistakes. But we are over." I said, sharper than intended. The echo of my own voice startled me. Mark's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a heartbeat I saw the ghost of the man I'd once loved. But the ache I expected never came. Instead, a quiet certainty settled in me. Whatever we'd been, it belonged to a past I no longer needed. When I closed the door, my heart wasn't heavy. It was steady, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a pair of storm-gray eyes flickered like a lighthouse. Natalie became both a refuge and a danger. We were professionals, colleagues, but the more I knew her, the more the boundaries blurred. We shared late-night meals in the hospital cafeteria, stories of childhood dreams and quiet failures. She told me about her mother, a nurse who had taught her to fight for every patient. I told her about my small-town upbringing, about how I once thought marriage was the pinnacle of a woman's life. One night, as a thunderstorm raged outside, she confessed in a near whisper, "I've spent so long trying to be perfect. Sometimes I wonder if anyone sees the real me." Without thinking, I reached across the table and took her hand. "I see you," I said. Her fingers tightened around mine, and for a long, fragile moment, neither of us moved. The storm outside roared, but inside, the air held a different kind of electricity, one that made my heart race in a way I hadn't felt in years. That was the night I knew. Still, knowing and acting are two very different things. My heart had been broken once. Could I risk it again? And Natalie, she carried her own invisible wounds, ones I could sense but not yet name. There were days when fear wrapped around me like a second skin. What would people say? What if I misread everything and lost not only her but the fragile friendship we'd built? But love, real love, doesn't ask for permission. It waits, patient but relentless, until the truth becomes impossible to ignore. And Natalie, she was my truth. The morning after the storm, the hospital seemed washed clean, its windows streaked with the pale glow of sunrise. I arrived earlier than usual, my steps quickened by something I wouldn't yet name. Natalie was already there, leaning over a chart at the nurse's station. A loose strand of hair had escaped her bun, curling against her temple. "Early bird," I teased, my voice softer than I intended. She looked up, and for an instant, the weariness in her face melted into a smile. "You beat me by 5 minutes," she said. I thought I'd have the place to myself. I wanted to tell her I'd come early hoping to see her, that the thought of our conversation last night had pulled me out of bed before dawn. Instead, I asked about the patient we'd treated during the storm. We spoke in quiet tones, our words practical, but beneath them ran a current neither of us could ignore. Later that day, during a rare lull in the emergency ward, Natalie invited me to the hospital's rooftop garden. "Best coffee spot in the building," she said, holding up 2 paper cups. "And the only place where the beeping can't follow you." The garden was small and square, framed by low shrubs and a few stubborn roses that clung to life despite the March chill. From up here, the city stretched in all directions, the skyline etched against a watercolor sky. Natalie handed me a cup and leaned on the railing, her eyes scanning the horizon. "It's beautiful," I said. "Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps me sane," she replied. "When the wards get too loud, when the cases pile up, I come here and remember there's more than the hospital." I studied her profile, the sharp line of her jaw, the soft curve of her lips. The morning light kissed her skin, turning her into something almost unreal. I wanted to tell her everything. About the nights I'd spent wondering what came next after my marriage collapsed, about the hollow that had slowly been filling since she arrived. But fear held me back. Instead, I said, "I think you make this place better." Natalie turned toward me, surprise flickering across her face. That might be the kindest thing anyone said to me this week. "It's only Tuesday," I said with a small smile. Her answering laugh was quiet but warm. She reached out, brushed a fingertip across my sleeve, and let it linger for a heartbeat. The touch was featherlight, but it sent a shiver racing down my spine. That night I dreamed of her. In the dream we were back on the rooftop, but the city below was nothing but a sea of stars. She stood close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath, her hand finding mine without hesitation. When she leaned in, the world blurred to a single point of light. I woke before her lips touched mine, the echo of the dream both intoxicating and cruel. For the first time in years, I didn't dread the morning. Reality, however, is never as simple as dreams. Rumors began to ripple through the hospital, whispers about late nights and lingering looks, I heard them in the break room, in the elevator, like the hiss of steam from an overheated pipe. Medicine thrived on gossip as much as it thrived on caffeine, and no one's life was immune. One afternoon, as I left a staff meeting, a junior resident offered me a knowing grin. "You and Dr. Pierce make a great team," he said, his tone heavy with implication. I forced a polite smile and walked away, my heart pounding. Later, I found Natalie in the records room, sifting through patient charts. I hesitated at the door, watching her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes softened. "Clara? You okay?" I closed the door behind me. "People are talking." Her expression barely shifted, but I caught the quick flash of understanding. "About us?" "Yes." Natalie set the chart aside and leaned against the counter. "Let them." I blinked. "Just like that." She shrugged, but there was a quiet fierceness in her gaze. "We haven't done anything wrong. And I'm not going to let gossip dictate how I live." Her words landed like a challenge and a comfort all at once. I realized how much I'd been holding my breath, how deeply the old habits of hiding and pleasing still ran. "You're braver than I am," I admitted. "No," she said softly. "I've just spent too many years pretending to be someone I'm not. I won't do it anymore." Something inside me shifted, a small but undeniable click, like a lock finally turning. A week later, she asked if I'd like to grab dinner outside the hospital. It was the first time we dared to step beyond the fluorescent world of medicine. We chose a quiet bistro on the edge of the city, a place with flickering candles and the scent of baked rosemary bread. Natalie arrived in a slate blue dress that hugged her frame with understated elegance. I wore a simple black blouse, suddenly aware of every heartbeat. The conversation flowed easily. Childhood stories, books we loved, the music that carried us through long nights. Yet beneath the laughter, tension simmered, a gentle, thrilling pressure neither of us sought to escape. When the check arrived, she reached for it, her fingers brushing mine. Neither of us pulled away. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For tonight. For being you." Natalie's smile was slow, deliberate. "Clara, she stopped, as if the next words were too heavy to release. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. "You don't have to say it," I whispered. "I know." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment the restaurant faded. There was only the quiet hum of our shared heartbeat. After that night, everything changed. We still worked side by side, still shared charts and patient rounds. But there was an unspoken understanding between us, a gravity that drew us closer with every passing day. A brush of her arm against mine felt electric. A shared glance across the nurse's station was enough to set my pulse racing. One evening, as the hospital emptied into the hush of midnight, she found me in the lab, bent over a stack of data. "You work too hard," she said gently. I looked up, startled by her presence and the softness in her voice. "Says the woman who's here at midnight." Natalie stepped closer, her gaze steady. "Maybe I just needed to see you." The room seemed to contract, the fluorescent lights dimming to a halo around her face. I felt the years of caution, of walls built to keep me safe, begin to crumble. "Clara," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I?" I didn't let her finish. I rose from my chair and closed the distance, my heart pounding like a second pulse in my ears. When our lips met, it wasn't a tentative brush but a deep, aching recognition, like finding a home I hadn't known I'd lost. Her hands framed my face, warm and certain. The taste of her lingered like the promise of something finally, undeniably real. When we finally parted, breathless, she rested her forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that since the first day we met," she confessed. A laugh escaped me, shaky but full of wonder. "So have I." It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was better, quiet, certain, like the first light of dawn after the longest night. For the first time in years, I wasn't lost. I was found. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my apartment floor like a quiet benediction. For years I had woken to a sense of heaviness, a dread that clung like a damp sheet. But that morning, as I opened my eyes and replayed the memory of Natalie's kiss, I felt something startlingly simple: hope. I spent the early hours in a slow haze, making coffee, watching the steam curl into the air. The city outside my window was already alive, buses rumbling, a dog barking in the courtyard, but the noise felt distant, softened by the glow still humming in my chest. When I reached the hospital, Natalie was already in motion, her white coat flaring behind her as she crossed the corridor. She caught my eye and allowed the briefest smile, just enough to confirm that last night hadn't been a dream. We moved through the morning like any other. Charts to update, patients to check. Yet every shared glance carried a secret, every accidental touch an echo of the night before. It was both thrilling and terrifying, as if we were balancing on a wire strung high above the world. At lunch she found me in the small research office. "Rooftop?" she asked with a lift of her brow. I nodded, my pulse quickening. Upstairs, the garden basked in an early spring sun. Natalie leaned against the railing, her dark hair catching streaks of gold. "Clara," she said softly, "are you okay with this? With us?" Her eyes held mine, steady and searching. "I don't know what this is yet," I admitted. "But I know that when I'm with you I feel alive. And that hasn't happened in a long time." Relief softened her features. "I feel it too." We stood there in silence, letting the breeze carry the unspoken words. For the first time I sensed that whatever this was, it belonged to both of us. But love, especially love that defies expectation, never unfolds without shadows. One afternoon, while reviewing patient records, I noticed a tightness in Natalie's expression, a flicker of something she quickly masked. "Everything okay?" I asked. She hesitated. "My mother's health. She's been having chest pains again. I need to fly home this weekend." I reached for her hand instinctively. "Do you want company?" She gave a small, grateful smile. "Not yet. But thank you." That evening, as she left for her shift, I lingered in the lab long after my work was done. I thought about how easily life can shift, how quickly the people we love can be pulled away. When Natalie returned 3 days later, she looked exhausted, the skin beneath her eyes bruised with sleeplessness. I met her in the staff lounge, where she collapsed onto the couch. "She's stable," she said, her voice a whisper. "But it scared me." I sat beside her, letting the quiet settle around us. Slowly, she leaned against my shoulder. "I don't want to lose her," she murmured. "You won't," I said. "Not if love has anything to say about it." Natalie's hand found mine, her grip a silent plea and a silent thank you all at once. Spring deepened into summer. We carved out moments between shift-stolen coffees, late-night walks, weekend drives to the lake outside the city. Our relationship unfolded like a slow-growing vine, patient and resilient. One Saturday, we spread a blanket beneath a stand of maples by the water. Natalie kicked off her shoes and lay back, eyes half closed. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked. "All the time," I said. "But it used to scare me. And now?" I turned to her, tracing the shape of her profile against the blue sky. "Now it feels possible." She smiled, a soft curve of lips that carried both promise and disbelief. "I want that too," she whispered. I reached out and brushed a thumb across her cheek. "Then let's build it. One day at a time." She closed her eyes and pressed her face into my palm. "Yes." Yet even as we stitched a life together, the remnants of my past refused to vanish quietly. One late evening, Mark called. His voice on the line was hesitant, almost fragile. "Clara, I heard you're seeing someone." I froze. "Who told you that? Does it matter?" He sighed. "I just wanted to say I'm glad you're happy." "Really?" The sincerity in his tone caught me off guard. For a long moment I said nothing. "Thank you," I finally replied. "I wasn't what you needed," he said. "I see that now." "I hope she is." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, a strange mixture of sadness and relief washing over me. Mark's words were not a wound. They were a closure I hadn't known I needed. Autumn arrived with a crispness that sharpened the city skyline. Natalie and I had settled into a rhythm, shared mornings, whispered plans for a small trip over Thanksgiving. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in the ICU, she found me in the rooftop garden. The wind carried the scent of fallen leaves, and the moon hung low and full. "I keep waiting for the world to tell us this is too hard," she said. "But it hasn't." I turned toward her, the city lights flickering behind her like scattered stars. "Maybe that's because it isn't." She stepped closer, slipping her arms around my waist. "You've changed everything," she whispered. "So have you." We kissed beneath the open sky, the city's heartbeat thrumming beneath our feet. In the months that followed, we built something quiet but unshakable. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic ultimatums, just the slow, steady weaving of two lives once broken, now remade. Some nights we sat together in silence, the weight of the past finally lifting. Other nights we planned a future neither of us had dared to imagine. A small house with a garden, a life shaped not by fear but by choice. And always when I looked at her, I felt the same quiet certainty that had struck me the night of the storm. I had not simply found love again. I had found myself. Winter crept over the city with a hush that turned every streetlight halo into a small miracle. By December, the hospital was draped in twinkling garlands and the smell of pine and antiseptic filled every hallway. Natalie and I had been together nearly a year. The rhythm of our lives, her overnight shifts, my endless research meetings had settled into something both ordinary and extraordinary. A quiet, living proof that love can grow even in the most sterile corners of the world. On Christmas Eve, we left the hospital just past midnight. Snow had started to fall, soft and slow, blanketing the parking lot in a gentle shimmer. Natalie reached for my hand without hesitation. We walked in silence, the crunch of fresh snow beneath our boots the only sound. "My mother's making her famous cranberry pie tomorrow," she said with a grin. "She wants you there. She says anyone who makes her daughter this happy deserves at least 2 slices. A warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the scarf around my neck. "I'd love to," I said. She squeezed my hand. "Good." She already set an extra place. We paused beneath a streetlight, flakes gathering in her dark hair like tiny silver crowns. I reached up, brushing the snow from her lashes. She caught my wrist and pulled me closer. "You know," she whispered, "a year ago I didn't believe in this. I thought real love was something other people found." "I thought the same," I said. "And then you walked into that conference room and ruined my perfectly organized loneliness." Her laugh was low and bright against the quiet night. She leaned in and kissed me, slow and deliberate, while the snow fell around us like a blessing. The months that followed were a lesson in ordinary joy. We hosted small dinners in my apartment, arguing playfully over recipes. We took weekend drives through the countryside, windows down, the wind tangling our hair. Natalie taught me how to sail a small boat on the lake outside the city. I taught her the names of constellations. One Saturday in early spring, we drove out to a wildflower meadow she had discovered during her residency. The field stretched like a painted sky across the earth, violet, gold, and soft white. We spread a blanket and lay back, the scent of damp soil and blossoms thick in the air. Natalie turned on her side and studied me. "Do you ever think about where we'd be if we hadn't met?" I smiled. "I'd probably still be hiding in the lab, married to my work instead of someone who makes me laugh at 3 a.m. She brushed her fingers against my cheek. "And I'd still be convincing myself that being alone was safer than risking this." I caught her hand and pressed a kiss into her palm. "Safe isn't living." Her eyes softened. "No, it isn't." We lay there until the sky blushed with sunset, our fingers laced like roots beneath the flowers. But life, even at its gentlest, continues to test the heart. Late that summer, Natalie's mother's condition worsened. The call came just after midnight. We rushed to the small-town hospital where her family waited, the air heavy with the sterile scent of worry. I stayed by Natalie's side as she spoke softly to her mother, as she held her hand through the night. When the dawn finally came and her mother's breathing steadied, Natalie stepped into the hallway and leaned against me. "She's okay for now," she whispered, tears glistening. "You were amazing," I said. "No," she replied, shaking her head. "We were." That night, as we drove home in silence, I realized how love had transformed us not into people without fear, but into people who faced fear together. Autumn returned, crisp and golden. Natalie and I moved into a small house on the edge of the city, a place with creaky wooden floors and a garden just big enough for late summer tomatoes. We painted the living room a soft gray and argued good-naturedly over where to hang the photographs we had taken on our weekend drives. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the first stars appear, Natalie handed me a small wrapped box. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a silver locket shaped like a heart, simple and unadorned. When I opened it, I found 2 tiny photographs, one of her mother, smiling in a field of daisies, the other of the two of us laughing in the hospital garden on a windy afternoon. I wanted you to have both pieces of my heart, she said softly. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Natalie. She reached for my hand. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want it to hold you. I slid my arms around her and held her close. The night air smelled of leaves and distant rain. For a long time we said nothing because nothing more needed to be said. Years later, people would ask how we met. Sometimes we told the simple version. Two doctors in the same hospital, friendship blooming into something more. Sometimes we told the truer story. Two women carrying their own scars, finding in each other a mirror and a home. When I think back to the night I signed my divorce papers, when the world felt like a hollow room, I can still taste the bitterness of that ending. But endings, I've learned, are simply beginnings that don't yet know their name. Natalie and I built a life not of grand gestures, but of countless small ones. Morning coffee shared in quiet, the way her hand found mine in a crowded hallway, the way laughter could break open even the heaviest days. And every time I catch her watching me across a room, every time her smile curves like the first light of morning, I remember. I did not just survive the wreckage of a failed marriage. I found the love that taught me what it truly means to be alive. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.